Hello and welcome to the first episode of a new tutorial series. In this series we are going to take apart sorting algorithms and visualize them. We are going to use Python and Tkinter as our graphics user interface, which is just a built-in user interface with Python 3. We are going to start from scratch. I'm also going to explain the graphic user interface that you see here. And we're just going to create this graphics user interface where you can generate random values with random datasets. This user interface will scale and normalize the data. So if I set the max value to 100, this is just going to scale up and normalize all the values in the dataset. Since we have a lot to do, let's stop talking and start coding. Let's start by importing Tkinter. So from Tkinter, import everything. And then we also want to import from Tkinter, and we want to import the TTK. And we also want to import random, since we're going to use that to create a random new array. Let's start with the basic Tkinter layout. So root is going to be equal to tk. Let's set the title to something like sorting algorithm visualization. And let's make the root.max size equal to 900 by 600. And we're going to work with those numbers, so make sure you have them about the same. And then root.config, and we just want a black background. So bg is going to be equal to black. And now we can actually start the application by just typing in root.main loop. And now we can just type in Python 3 sorting algorithms.py in our terminal, or just run it however you're used to in Windows or Linux. And now we have a black window with the sorting algorithms with visualization as our title. Awesome. Let's start by creating the UI frame, which is going to be the top one with the options. So just type in UI and then frame. And this is going to be equal to a new frame. And we want the master to be the root. The width is going to be equal to 600 because that's the width that we set up for the max size. The height is going to be equal to something 200. And then the background is going to be equal to gray. Then we have to set up the grid. So UI frame.grid. And we want to set the row to 0 and the column to 0 as well. The padding, let's set some padding X to something like 10. And then some kind of padding Y to something like 5. That's quite alright. Let's now create the canvas, which is quite important for the drawing. So the canvas variable is going to be equal to the canvas function. Here we have to declare the master as well, so root. And the width is going to be equal to 600 as well. And the height is going to be equal to 380 because we have to subtract the padding on top right here. So padding Y top bottom, then we are going to add the same padding right here as well. So that's 20 from the padding, and then we have to subtract the height right here from this height, which will give us 380 because 600 minus 200 is 400 minus 20 for the padding Y is going to be 380. And we have to also set the canvas.grid variable. And this is going to be row number 1 so that it is under the UI frame. And then we want to set up the column. And it's just going to be column 0. And let's cut out the padding X and padding Y right here, which I falsely copied. And let's put those down here. And we want to change the background from the canvas at the top to something like white. And if I now run it, I will see two fields, a gray one for the user interface and then a canvas at the bottom, which is white with the paddings on each side so that we have a black background. Awesome. Let's now start by creating our user interface area for the user interface frame. Let's start by just creating a label, and we want the text to be equal to algorithm, and the background is going to be gray as well so that it blends in nicely. And that's it for the label, and we want to set it to a grid right away, so grid. And in here we have to select the row 0 because we want it to be at the top left corner, and the column is going to be 0 as well. Let's add some padding X, something like 5, and then padding Y, 5 as well. And we want to set the sticky parameter to west, which means left. That's quite alright for the label. After the label, we want to create a combo box, and we have to actually keep a reference to that. Let's call this the algorithm menu. This is going to be equal to the TTK that we imported earlier, and then combo box. This is going to be in the UI frame again, and the text variable that we want to save the output to is going to be equal to a new variable that we have not created yet. So let's hop up here and right here before we declare the layouts, and let's call this the selected algorithm. And this is going to be equal to a string var because this will just keep it at nothing at the start. And now we can copy the name, and the text variable is going to be the selected algorithm. And for the values, we want to start with something like bubble sort and merge sort. And we also have to set the grid. So the algorithm menu.grid is going to be set to the first row. Column is going to be equal to the first one so that it's right next to the algorithm. And then the padding x is going to be equal to 5 and padding y as well. If I now try to run it, I have a combo box with the algorithm text right here. And if I select it, I can select either bubble sort or merge sort. Awesome. But I want to set the first one up as the default. So algorithm menu.current, and this is going to be equal to the index 0, so that we select the first one, which is going to be bubble sort. And as you saw in the intro, we also had a generate button right at the top right corner. So let's make a new button, and let's make this in the UI frame as well. And the text is going to be something like generate. And the command is going to be a function which we have not created yet. So just let's go up here under the variables and let's define a new function. Let's call this generate. And it's not going to take in any parameters. And we just want to print for now something like algorithm selected, 2 dots, and then a plus and selected algorithm dot get. This is how we get the value that has been set up by the user. And right here we want to call generate function, and let's make the background red so that we know that it's a important function. Let's also set up the grid while we're at it. So the row is going to be 0, the column is going to be 2, and then padding x and padding y is going to be 5 again. If I start it, we have a button, and if I click it, I'm going to see the bubble sort written in the terminal. And if I hover back to it and click on a different algorithm, so merge sort, I'm going to see merge sort written in the terminal. Awesome. So that works, how we set it up. That's going to be it for the first row, which is the index of 0. Let's now work on the second row. And to start it up, we just copy the label that we have already created and change the algorithm to size. And without the dots right here, and the row is going to be changed to row 1 because we are working on the next row. And now we want to create a input box which we have to save the reference to again, so size entry. So the size entry is going to be equal to a new entry object, so entry like this, and we just want to set it to the UI frame. And in the next step we want the size entry.grid to be set up to a new grid, and I'm just going to grab the grid right here and paste it down here. We want the first row, but we want the second column, so index number 1, and everything else is going to stay the same. And let's copy this and paste it once and paste it twice for the min value, and then for the max value. So let's change these two up, so min and max. For the text, let's now change the column so that we do not forget about it. So the size label is going to be 0, then 1, then we want the number 2 and the number 3. And number 4 and 5. And we also want to change the names. This is going to be the min entry, and don't forget to change it down here as well. And then we are going to have the max entry, and let's change it down here as well. If I run it, I get some kind of entry fields, 1, 2, 3 entry fields, a generate button, and then a drop down menu right here. This is going to be the UI for now. So let's hop into actually making this UI work. Let's create a new function right above the generate function, and let's call this the draw data function. And this is going to take in an array with the data that we want to draw. Let's declare a couple of variables like canvas height, and this is going to be 380, just the same height that we had before. That's all right. And let's also create a canvas width. This is going to be equal to 600. And then we want a x width. This is just going to be the width of the bar graphs, and this is going to be calculated because a different data set is going to have a different width of each single pixel because we want to scale it, not have it set. And to do that, we just want the canvas width divided by the length of the data, and we have to add 1 to it, so +1 in parentheses. And this is not x width, this is going to be canvas width like this. Awesome. And we want a offset so that we do not start at the border, so offset is going to be something like 30. And we also want a small spacing in between the bars. Let's now start looping with a for loop for I as the iterator, and we want to enumerate the data. We are going to use the create rectangle function for drawing the rectangles, which does require 4 variables from us, which are the bottom right corner and the top left corner. So let's start with the top left corner. Let's call this x0 and y0, and these are going to be equal to the iterator times the x width plus some kind of offset, because we do not want to start immediately at the left side, and then we want to add some spacing. And the y0 is going to be equal to the canvas height minus the height that we have set up. Let's now calculate the bottom right coordinate, which are just going to be x1 and y1. and x1 is going to be equal to the iterator plus 1, so that we have always one more times the x width plus the offset, but without the spacing this time. And then the y1 is going to be equal to the canvas height. And now we can create our rectangles, which are just going to be x0, y0, and x1 and y1. And let's also color it. So the fill color is going to be red. And let's also create a text. So canvas dot create text. And we want to create the text at the x0 plus some kind of offset. So let's do something like 2 pixels. And then y0. The anchor is going to be SW. The text is going to be equal to the string function, and we want to pass in the data on the I index to the string function so that we have the actual number written over the bar. And this should be actually alright. So let's copy the function. And right here where we generate something, we want to pass in the function and then some kind of data. We do not have a data arraylet, so just create some demo data array. So 1, 2, 4, 6, for example. And now we have data and we can call this function. So let's try it out. If I hit the generate button, I'm going to see the data right here at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it, but it's really small. Let's try to put in some bigger values, something like 60, 40, 20, and then 10. And if I hit the generate button, I now see that the data is a little bit bigger. But the smart thing to do would be to actually normalize this data. And we want to normalize it right before we draw it. And we want to normalize the data that we pass in the draw data function from 0 to 1, which is going to be quite simple. So let's make a new array, call it normalized data. And this is going to be equal to the index divided by max of the data for each index in the data array. And now we want to actually enumerate through the normalized data object, so that the height is going to be this height. But now we have to actually multiply it by some kind of value so that it's going to be different size. And this value is going to be smaller than the canvas height, but it's not going to be exactly the canvas height, because then the normalized data with the biggest value, so the max, would be 1, and then we would fill up the whole canvas. So let's try something like 340 so that the maximum value leaves us 40 pixels. And now if I generate the values, I'm going to have exactly 40 pixels right here. And if I go into the code and delete the zeros right here and save it and run it again and hit the generate button, I'm going to see the exact same sizes because we normalized the values from 0 to 1. Awesome. Be sure to have the text string data, not normalized data right here. We want to use the normal data values so that the user will see the bigger numbers, the integers displayed right here. Let's now work with the generate button, because we actually want to use these values that the user puts in with the min, max, and so on. And we can get these values simply by just typing in that the min value is going to be equal to the min entry object that we have created earlier, .get function. But we have to cast it to an integer because we want the int value. Now we want to do the same thing for the max value. And then we have to change it in here to max entry. The size is going to be the size entry.get. Awesome. Now we can actually generate our data set simply by creating a empty data array like this and then looping through it. So for every single element in the range of the size that we passed in, we want to create a new set. So data.append at the end. And we want to create a new number by random.randRange. And we want these values to range from the min value that we passed in to the max value plus 1, so that we include the number. After generating the data set, we can just call the draw data function. So let's try that out. For the size, I'm going to type in 10. The min value is going to be 1 and the max value is going to be something like 20. And if I generate, I'm going to have exactly 10 values ranging from 1 to 20, including 20, but we do not have to get the min or max values. And if I generate again, I will see that sometimes I hit the 20 right here, for example, but we do not redraw the whole screen. Let's just do that by simply deleting everything in the canvas. So canvas.delete, and we want to delete all. That should get rid of the problem. But now we have one big problem, one big issue, because the user does not have to input an integer in the input field. So we want to try this. And if the user does not input an integer, then we want to get to the accept block. And we want to set the min value by hand. And let's just set up the min value in case of an error to something like 1. And we want to do this exact same thing for all of these. So try this. and accept, and we want to accept it like this, and then the max value is going to be something like 10. Let's try the same thing for the size, and if the size fails, if the user typed in a letter, then we want to accept it and just hard code it to something like 10 as well. And there's still a couple of bugs that we can have, and we also want to check if the min value that the user entered is less than 0, and if this is true, then we want to set the min value to 0 so that we cannot go below that. And we also want to check if the max value is greater than 100, for example, then we want to set the max value to something like 100. We also want to check if the size is greater than something like 30. That's just going to be too much on our little screen. Or if the size is less than 3, because I don't think it makes sense to run a sorting algorithm if the size is just going to be less than 3. And if this is true, then we want to set the size to something like, let's say, 25, which is going to be some kind of maximum for us. And one very important thing is we want to check if the min value is greater than the max value. And if this is true, then we just want to swap those two values. Min val, comma, max val is going to be equal to the max value, comma, min value. If I now start the app, put in some numbers like 10, 0, and 10 again, I'm going to generate some kind of new data set. And if I hit generate a couple of times, we see that every time we have a new random data set. If I put the size to something like 50, I'm going to stop at exactly 25 that we put in. And we can check if I put in a -5 as the size, I'm going to get the 25 again, but let's put in 10 again. And now if the min value is going to be 50, the max is going to be 0, then we are going to swap those values. That's quite all right. And we can also check if I put in a -3 for the min value, I'm going to just generate the data set from 0. Awesome. This is going to be it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next part, we're going to actually start working on the bubble sort algorithm. So stay tuned for that, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next one. Bye!